Overnight, the global economy was pushed to the absolute brink. The United States military has just launched another aggressive round of targeted strikes deep inside Iranian territory. These strikes, executing into the early morning hours of Monday, July 13, 2026, were authorized with a single, desperate objective: to degrade Iran's ability to attack commercial ships that are attempting to freely transit the Strait of Hormuz. This rapid military escalation came immediately after attacks by the United States military on Sunday morning, which were a direct response to a devastating Iranian strike on a container ship traversing that critical waterway the day before. We are no longer looking at a localized dispute. We are witnessing the systematic dismantling of global maritime trade. But to understand why the United States is risking an all-out regional war, and more importantly, what this means for the inflation rate and the cost of living for every single American consumer, we need to look at the numbers. The Strait of Hormuz is not just a body of water. It is the absolute foundation of the modern industrial world. Geographically, it is a remarkably narrow channel, but economically, it is the jugular vein of the global energy sector. This single waterway carries roughly 1/5 of the entire world's oil and gas supplies. To put that immense volume into perspective, before this war erupted, around 130 commercial ships passed through this narrow strait every single day. There are no viable pipelines or alternative land routes capable of handling this sheer tonnage of crude oil and liquefied natural gas. If you shut down the strait, you shut down the energy grid of the planet, and that is exactly what is happening right now. The ripple effects of this closure are already crossing the Atlantic, threatening to upend the United States economy just as the Federal Reserve was attempting to stabilize domestic inflation. The United States Central Command has publicly stated that Sunday's strikes were launched to continue degrading the ability of Iranian forces to attack civilian mariners and commercial vessels. But despite the overwhelming firepower of the U.S. military, the waterway remains paralyzingly dangerous. To understand the gravity of the events of July 13th, we have to look back at the catalyst that ignited this entire crisis. The match was struck on February 28, 2026, when the United States and Israel initiated a massive, coordinated series of airstrikes against Iran. This military campaign, designated as Operation Epic Fury, aggressively targeted military facilities, nuclear sites, and critical Iranian leadership. The operation resulted in the death of Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for global commerce. In direct retaliation to Operation Epic Fury, shipping traffic through the Strait of Hormuz has been largely blocked by Iran since that fateful day in late February. The Iranian military apparatus effectively weaponized the geography of the Persian Gulf. Economic historians and energy analysts are already classifying this ongoing closure of the strait as the largest disruption to world energy supply since the infamous 1970s energy crisis, as well as the single largest disruption in the entire history of the world oil market. For American consumers, the echoes of the 1970s gas lines are becoming a terrifying modern reality. For a brief, fleeting moment this summer, there was a glimmer of hope that the global economy might be spared from the brink. A fragile truce agreement had been signed by Iran and the United States on June 17, 2026. But the ink on that ceasefire barely had time to dry before the region plunged back into chaos. By early July, the ceasefire was shattered. The United States executed strikes against approximately 140 Iranian military targets on July 11th, systematically hitting missile and drone sites, surface-to-air missile launchers, and naval capabilities. The Iranian response was swift and geographically expansive. On July 12th, Iran fired a barrage of missiles and drones at United States facilities located in Bahrain, Kuwait, Jordan, Qatar, and Oman. This widespread assault was launched in direct retaliation for the devastating U.S. strikes the day prior. We are no longer watching a localized blockade. We are watching a heavily armed, multi-front regional war where the primary casualty is the global supply chain. While the geopolitical maneuvering happens in war rooms, the human and economic toll on the water is staggering. Because of the renewed hostilities, shipping in the Strait of Hormuz was brought to a near standstill. As a direct result, there are currently around 6,000 commercial seafarers trapped and stranded aboard hundreds of immobile vessels. The head of the UN International Maritime Organization has insisted that all transit through the strait must be avoided until the necessary safety conditions are finally put in place. This complete paralysis of maritime movement has sent a violent shockwave through the commodity markets. The reported attacks in the waterway caused a severe, temporary spike in crude oil prices, which eventually recovered to around $77 per barrel by Thursday. However, it is vital to note that this price point remains significantly higher than the levels seen before the war began. For the average viewer in the United States, this is not just abstract foreign policy. This is an aggressive tax on your daily life. Higher sustained crude oil prices mean higher diesel costs for logistics companies, which immediately translates to higher prices for groceries, consumer goods, and basic services. The United States economy, which has been fighting a grueling battle against domestic inflation for years, is now facing a massive, externally generated inflationary shock. The international community is practically begging for a resolution, but diplomatic channels appear completely severed. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has been forced to publicly urge both the United States and Iran to halt their new outbreak of fighting and to urgently resume negotiations to end the war. Furthermore, the Secretary General explicitly stated that a return to full-scale hostilities would have absolutely catastrophic consequences for the peoples of the region, and crucially, for the global economy as a whole. Yet despite these dire warnings from the highest levels of international leadership, the escalation continues unabated. The fundamental problem is a total misalignment of strategic objectives. The United States demands freedom of navigation and the protection of a maritime corridor that is essential for the survival of the global capitalist system. Conversely, Iran is using the geographical reality of the strait as its ultimate geopolitical leverage, demonstrating that they hold the power to suffocate the world's energy supply at will. We are standing on the precipice of a fundamentally altered global economy. If the Strait of Hormuz remains contested, or worse, entirely impassable, the economic ramifications will be permanent. Supply chains will have to be entirely rerouted, adding massive fuel and insurance costs to every single product shipped globally. The United States will be forced to reconsider its entire macroeconomic strategy, as the Federal Reserve will find itself powerless to control inflation driven by physical supply shortages halfway across the world. The strikes of July 13, 2026, were not just military maneuvers. They were desperate attempts to keep the arteries of the global economy pumping. But as the smoke clears over the Persian Gulf, one thing is abundantly clear. The era of cheap, reliable global shipping is effectively over. The war for the Strait of Hormuz is, in reality, a war for the future of your money. Thank you for watching this deep dive. If you want to understand the facts behind the forces shaping our new reality, make sure to subscribe to the channel, and we will see you in the next documentary.